Welcome everybody. My name is Paul Holden. I'm the President and CEO of the Burnaby Board of Trade. And thanks for joining us today for this webinar. This is the way that most of our events, or all of the events, are happening right now, and probably will do for some while. And thanks for joining us, and thanks for Chloe, who will be introducing formally a little bit later. First of all, I'd like to recognise that the BBOT operates on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam and Squamish nations. For those of you today who have joined us who may not be fully familiar with the Burnaby Board of Trade and what we do, I'll just take a couple of minutes, if I may, to give you a bit of a rundown of our role as a business organisation. So we are the Chamber of Commerce for the City of Burnaby. We have around 1,100 members, ranging from smaller, often individually run businesses, right the way up to some of the larger corporations that you'll see operating across the city. And it's our role, really. We describe ourselves as a 3C organisation, and that is to be a catalyst for business and economic development, a convener of business leaders and of business people, and a champion for business. And of course, this role has changed quite a bit over the last little while because obviously of the inability to conduct events in the way that we have done before. And just the changing needs of the businesses and the organisations that we represent. And hopefully what you've seen, but to be honest, whether you're a member or not, but hopefully what you've seen over this last few months is that those areas of 3C are still in existence, but they've changed a little. And as a catalyst for economic development and for supporting business, we've been really proactively providing all the resources that businesses might need to help get them through what's really been a unique and completely unprecedented situation. So that role has changed dramatically, and we've been working tirelessly to make sure that businesses have the tools and resources that they need to survive, and not just survive, but to manage that they come out at the other end of all of this in the healthiest state that they can. As a convener, bringing people together, well, we're doing that through these kind of formats now. We've been bringing in political leaders and business leaders over the last few months to make sure, again, that our business community hears from the people in influence and people who have some really important information to share for our members and the business community in general. And as a champion, I guess that's where we've really stepped up in a way. We've always been a champion for business, but even more so now. Right from the beginning, when we were leading advocacy charges for the wage subsidy to be improved from the original 10%, right the way through to at the provincial, federal and municipal level, advocating passionately and as forcefully as we can for measures to help businesses in these times that really would never have been predicted. And all credit to governments, although there are some areas that we're still advocating for, particularly in the area of this temporary layoff deadline, which is looming. But we're continuing to advocate for improvements, but it's been heartening to see how quickly the government reacted in many ways. So that's just a little bit of background on what we do. So this event today, Talk So They Listen, is the first of a three-part series, which is developed by our Women's Business Success Network to provide professional development and learning opportunities for the business community. The Women's Business Success Network is a program of the Burnaby Board of Trade, which has been around now for a number of years, I think about 5 or 6 years now, and brings together women and men from diverse backgrounds to build connections through events, to advocate for advancing the interests of women in business, and to create platforms for learning and collaboration like we have here today. So as I said, this is the first of 3. The next 2 are how to position yourself and your brand as the best or the only to thrive in any economy. And that's on July the 9th. And on July the 21st, we have how to negotiate during a pandemic and other uncertain times. This is an initiative of the Women's Business Success Network. Men are always welcome by the Women's Network. And we have a number here today. Very important that men get involved in the conversations about how we can help remove and reduce barriers for women's success in business, and to make sure we're all collaborating as much as we can to achieve those goals. We have some of our board of directors in attendance today. I'd like to introduce. We have Andrew Scott, who's the chair of our board of directors. We have Raj Sharma, who represents BC Hydro on our board. Paula Scaper from Kinetics Media Communications, and you'll be hearing in a few seconds now from Lisa Muir from Pacific Blue Cross. We also have a number of the committee members from our Women's Business Success Network here today. I won't go through the full list because there's quite a few of them on here, but we appreciate your support. It's a very active group that, as I say, works not just on putting together important and meaningful events such as this, but also helping us to devise and identify advocacy opportunities. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to tonight's event sponsors, or today's event sponsors, each of whom are really important parts of the business community. Our platinum sponsor is Pacific Blue Cross, who have been BC's leading benefits provider for over 75 years and provide health, dental, life, disability and travel coverage for approximately 1.5 million British Columbians from their head office, which as we know is right here in Burnaby. They're an integral part of the Burnaby Board of Trade and a major employer here in the city, and we're very happy to have your support today. And our gold sponsor, more or less down the road from Pacific Blue Cross, is Electronic Arts Canada, one of the city's highest profile businesses, the anchor of our thriving tech sector and an amazing corporate citizen in our community. EA is heavily involved in various local programs in Burnaby and supports our organisation on many of our initiatives. So I'd like to thank them today for their support, the support of the BBOT and of the community and everything they do for us all throughout the year. So I'd now like to introduce our platinum sponsor, Lisa Muir, Senior VP and Chief Operating Officer of Pacific Blue Cross. Lisa is a member of the Board of Directors of the BBOT and a past chair, and she's 2019's Burnaby Business Person of the Year. So Lisa, would you like to say a few words of welcome, please?
Thanks very much, Paul. And good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'd really like to thank the Burnaby Board of Trade for shifting their programming for the Women's Business Success virtual series. I think COVID has really forced us all to look at how we do things and really what's important. And I'm very grateful that the Board of Trade is committed to offering these sessions, which I really think are practical and compelling for women and actually anybody in any stage of their career. But before I get started, I'd like to just share something personally today. I've been with Pacific Blue Cross for many, many years, too many years for me to say out loud. I actually started in the claims area, and I've had an opportunity to learn and develop many new skills throughout my career, presentations being a key component of it. But all through my career, my mantra has been, before and today, is what can I do to help, or what can I or Pacific Blue Cross do to make a difference in whatever sentiment I'm in. So really, this whole sentiment of what can we do to help is really part of our culture at Pacific Blue Cross. And it's a big reason of why Pacific Blue Cross has been successful for the 75 years. And it's a big part of why I've been there for 75 years as well. Really what I found is that if you really want people to listen to what you have to say, you first of all really need to make sure you understand where they're coming from, what their needs or problems are, what they're looking for. So to me, talk so they listen really means listen before you talk. At Pacific Blue Cross, we practice this by trying to understand how we can help our members and clients and create the products and services and communications that are tailored to them and their needs. Showing people that you really hear them and then providing solutions that meets their needs is a really powerful combination. I'm just like to end to say that I'm really happy that everyone has joined us this morning, and I hope and I know you will get a lot out of Chloe's presentation. I know I'm looking forward to it myself. So thank you very much, and welcome to everybody, and back to you, Paul.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks for your support. We really appreciate it. I'd now like to introduce Chloe Ellis. Chloe works with RBC Royal Bank of Canada and is skilled in coaching, sales, event management, fundraising, and management. Chloe is an experienced public speaker who shares a passion for effective communications to empower women and future generations. She currently sits on the executive board as treasurer and charter member for the Sir Optimist International of New Westminster and Burnaby. She also enjoys mentoring the leaders of tomorrow through the UBC Blossom Mentorship Program and through our very own Burnaby Board of Trade Access Program. Chloe, I believe, has set up Slido for the question session, which I think is coming later on. I'm sure she'll explain how that's likely to work, and I think Corey and Tessa are standing by to assist in that part of the session today. But for now, I'd like to pass on the floor to Chloe, and over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Paul, and thank you, Lisa, for your words as well. And welcome everybody to Talk So They Listen, a developmental course on different tips and techniques that you can use and you can employ to be your most authentic presenter and your best self. As Paul mentioned, I work for RBC, but my career in public speaking and being a professional speaker started many, many years before that. An anecdote about myself is my family has always said that as soon as I could talk, I was pretty much broadcasting to the world. So my family decided it was probably a very good idea to hone a certain skills so that maybe I wasn't running screaming through the house all the time, which many of us with children at home know how challenging that can be. So it's truly a pleasure for me to be here today to share some tips and techniques and some words of wisdom. Kicking it right off, Lisa really nailed what this presentation is about. It was actually Jim Wagstaff as well as some of the senior directors of TED Talks, which I'm sure many of us have listened to before. And they said it's about the ABCs. It's audience before content. And it can be a real challenge at times when we don't necessarily know our audiences to be able to kind of reflect and craft that message. But more importantly, it's around who we are as individuals, for us to be able to have some sort of self-awareness, both internal and external, to be able to understand where some of our biases might come from. So if we move forward to the PowerPoint, which Corey's being my absolute fantastic PowerPoint presenter for today, the welcome slide is going to have the Slido question and answer feature, which we're able to do. So you can submit your questions throughout the course of this presentation, and we'll have a formal question and answer period at the end. So feel free to visit slido.com, and you can see the entry code there, 15994, for those following along on the phone. And please feel free to submit any questions that you do have. So for us to really kick it off and get on the same page, if we go to the next slide, Corey, it really comes down to what makes a good presenter. And for us, again, to be able to recognize that, we're going to go through the us, the them, and the messaging. So Corey, you can go ahead and just click through because there are some features to this one. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Perfect. And we'll actually be able to use today's presentation as a fantastic case study when we get to how we're dealing with technology in the world of today. So go ahead and keep clicking through, Corey. I do like a lot of animations in my presentation, so you'll get used to that one. So under the U category, we're going to unpack some of the biases and baggages that we have and identify some ticks and tells. And that's a really important feature because the audience is going to be able to pick up on our discomfort as well as, you know, our distraction. For our messaging, we're going to be able to go through what our intention is as well as the design of our message. And for our audience, we're going to make sure that we know who's who and have some kind of understanding of spatial awareness, especially when we're dealing with backdrops and technology sets. So if we go through to the next slide here, and Corey, feel free to just keep clicking until we reach the 6th image. So for everyone on the call today, I want you to think about what makes a good presenter. What is it? Was it a feeling that they left you with? Did they inspire you? Was it how they spoke? Take a moment and reflect on a recent presentation that you've had. What was some of the strengths that you felt you were able to provide to your audience? Now, take a moment and maybe jot down, because we'll review this later. What was one of the potential weaknesses that you felt you had in this presentation? It could have been tone of voice. It could have been losing our lines. It could have been a technology failure. There are many things that can happen throughout our presentation journey from our perspective as well as the audience that can affect our authentic presenter self. So if we move on to the next slide, Corey, the number one fear, and there's been some debate on this, the number one fear is public speaking. Number one fear is public speaking. There have been many research papers published from the Harvard Business Review all the way to Psychology Today that have said that fear of public speaking is so ingrained in us that we literally lose our ability to communicate, which is exactly the act in which we're trying to perform. And fear, again, we get clammy hands, we start to shake. And that's a terrifying feeling. And a lot of times people will actually have that anxiety before they even reach the stage. Or maybe that anxiety hits when you're actually creating your content, or maybe just the idea of your boss patting you on the shoulder and say, hey, it's time for you to present, can be extremely daunting. But there are some great things that we can do to make sure that we can handle that fear. Now, it is completely normal for everyone to have a small feeling of anxiety. It's a spectrum, to be honest with you. And it comes down to how often we've presented. Is this a new setting that we're presenting in? To whom are we presenting? Is the content in which we're presenting something we're very, very familiar with? Or is it something that's new? So right off the bat, I want to share with you a technique that I've learned and employed over many, many years of public speaking, is your breath. And for any yoga enthusiasts out there, breath is life. It is literally what drives our instrument, which is our voice. So one of the greatest techniques I can teach you is a little bit of breath control. Okay? So we'll all try it. So if you like, I invite you to close your eyes. This exercise will only take maybe 15, 20 seconds. So if we close our eyes and we just start to realize what our breath is right now. And I know that there's a big red fear up on the screen, which probably is not helping your fear, but just bear with me. So just try to assess where your breathing is. Are you taking long, deep breaths? Are you taking shallow breaths? Are you breathing from your shoulders? Or are you breathing from your diaphragm? What I'd like you to do is take a deep breath in and hold it there for a moment. And then I want you to release it in a cadence of 3. So go and then stop, and then stop, and then let the rest out. Okay? I'd like us to try that one more time. Breathe in, hold it and release, and then release again, and then release all of your air. Hopefully, we're all feeling a little bit less anxious. It is this type of breath control, when we're able to harness this, when we're walking up to the stage, when we're on stage, and we start to let that fear monster take hold. This is one of the most fundamental techniques that will help you get your words out and get your point across. And more importantly, it will actually help calm you down. So I highly encourage everyone to employ one of these techniques. And a lot of these techniques that you're going to be hearing today are likely things that you're already doing. So this is probably just going to be a positive reinforcement of good behaviors that you do have. And I don't deny that there's a plethora of public speaking resources out there. There are from TED Talks to webinars like we're doing today, to books, to courses. I mean, you name it. There's a lot of things out there. But trust me, everybody can benefit from a little professional development. So if this is just a refresher, or if you're hearing and new and exciting things, I highly encourage you to at least try them. And if they work, great. And if they don't, move on and try something else. Okay? So Corey, if you move on to the next slide, this is one of my favorite assessments that we do. And this isn't something as high level as, let's say, a Myers-Briggs or a full psychoanalysis on this. But we do come to stage. We do come to present, and we do have certain biases and baggage that we bring. And the most important lesson I can impart on anyone, and I know we've heard this in business, we've probably heard it from our leaders before, is leave that baggage at the door. Leave that emotional, that psychological baggage, whatever's affecting you at that moment, leave that at the door and bring your whole self to work. Bring your whole self into your presentation. Well, that is much easier said than done, especially for a lot of us on the call today where we're working from a home office and there may be pets in the background or children somewhere else. It can be very challenging to actually compartmentalize our family space and our professional space. And I commend everyone for the amazing job that you're doing, developing and adapting to this new situation. So it was actually the Harvard Business Review that had a great article that reviewed what awareness actually means. So for us to be able to identify if we have biases, which we all do, and sometimes heuristics or little shortcuts can help us with things, and other times they may lead us a little bit astray. So the internal awareness piece is crucial because that is how we see ourselves. That is how we see ourselves. So all of our emotions, all of our experiences, everything. And when we see ourselves in a positive light, obviously that's going to be portrayed outward, and there's going to be a likelihood that other people are going to see you in a very positive light. Now, the internal factor of that, or the outer factor of that rather, is how other people see us. So it's both of those sides of the coin put together. And that can be a really challenging conversation to navigate for individuals because some of us don't necessarily practice self-reflection. And oftentimes when we go through a presentation and maybe it didn't go so well, our immediate decision is to say, hey, we're going to forget about it and move on. So there definitely can be some advantages to understanding when we come to the table, what are some of the biases that we may have? Now, there's quite a few of them that go out there, but one of the ones when I was doing some research for this webinar, this course here, I came across one that really resonated with me, and it was the availability bias. And what that means is we're estimating something to occur based on how many times it's happened to us. And that really struck me because a lot of people feel anxiety, presentation, public speaking, it's a lot. So if we've had bad experiences before, or we've conditioned ourselves to feel anxious and fearful every time we hear someone say, you're going to get up and make a presentation, like I said, we've conditioned ourselves to say that's what's going to happen this time. So out of all of the biases, I would say that's a fundamental one for us to try not to already convince ourselves that public speaking is going to be a challenge. Public speaking provides an opportunity for you to bring the audience on a journey with you. A lot of times when I do presentations like this one, or we do developmental courses, people often ask me, like, why do you love to present? And I say, well, that's a very interesting question. I mean, everybody has their sport. Public speaking tends to be something that I've always leaned into. But more importantly, I say, what was it in your past experiences that have created this fear and anxiety? And oftentimes it comes down to a feeling of self-worth. Are we worth someone else's time? Am I the best person to be able to present this material? Maybe my boss is better suited to present this, or my colleague. And we're almost dismissive of our own value. So I challenge everybody to just say, look, we have to check our ego at the door anytime we do a presentation. But it's really important for us to understand that we have value in what we're saying. And to Lisa's earlier point, it's very important to make sure that what we're saying is resonating with the audience. That the audience is going to have expectations, and we're hopefully supposed to deliver on those expectations. So we have to get out of our own head and get into the moment. That is an acting term that I'm sure many people have already heard of, be in the moment, because it's kind of like a dance between the audience and the presenter. We're picking up on cues, the audience is picking up on cues, so we need to be able to receive those in an authentic way. And for us to do that, we have to put our biases aside. Now, a very interesting factor, and for everyone that's been a part of a presentation, a group presentation, my goodness, sometimes they go really well, and sometimes they don't go that well. Now, the tics and the tells are when a presenter demonstrates some sort of distraction or discomfort, and it alerts the audience that this presenter is either uncomfortable or anxious, or they don't necessarily want to be there. Now, I'll share an anecdotal story. I was adjudicating a university's business plan. They were sharing all of their business plans with a group of us panelists and judges. And there was this one team that got up there, and they were well polished. You know, they looked like they knew their stuff. They were dressed appropriately. They reviewed their notes when they came in. They were professional. But there was one individual on their team that potentially was a little too confident. Now, confidence is absolutely fantastic. It can also, if it's too confident, can be a sign that someone's actually quite anxious. So this person was what we would call hamming, or they were miming, so they were mimicking. So they were taking the focus away from the rest of the group. And clearly, in the presentation preparation that this team did, they put a lot of their energy and focus on this one individual being able to carry the whole presentation, because he clearly had demonstrated this ability to be confident and present very clearly. Now, what do you think probably happened, actually did happen in that presentation? This individual forgot their lines, completely forgot their lines. And because their group members were A, not really paying attention, and 2, put so much stock into this one individual, the whole presentation went sideways. Nobody was there to be able to run in and save the presentation at that point, and it really fell flat. So I use that as a cautionary tale to say every member of your group needs to be aware of certain skills and strengths that they do have, but also everybody in the group needs to be focusing on what's happening. Now, different ticks and tells that I've seen over the years, one of my favorite ones, and you can see it on the news, you can see it when they're doing press conferences, is the dance. So what that means is somebody is shifting their weight from one foot to the other in some kind of cadence. That is a very interesting stance because it means that they're not fully grounded. It also means that they're probably uncomfortable with what they're saying. Similar to poker tells. Another one is the head bob, which people will do quite often. Or speaking in a lilt, where every answer is always a question. So we've seen all of these different types of things. We will continue to see these different types of ticks and tells. Fundamentally, again, we need to understand that this is a reflection of how we're projecting to the audience. So we need to make sure that when we're practicing, we try to avoid any type of action that's not a direct intention of what we're trying to convey. And intention is something that's absolutely crucial. Because if we have a clear intention, which is the why behind the words, then typically the hand gestures, the body, the voice will convey that same message if you're truly being authentic and living in the moment. And again, that can be quite challenging for individuals. And again, if we kind of play on this discomfort factor, which could be a precursor to why we would have these ticks and tells, I'll share with you a TED Talk by Amy Cuddy. Now, she's one of the psychologists, social psychologists at Harvard Business School, and she did a TED Talk on power posing. And she ran her AP students through this, brief experiment where she had them power pose, like a Superman pose or something very broad, instead of something very timid, for a period of 2 minutes. And then she asked them to either take a test or present. And what do you think happened after they were able to power pose? Their confidence levels actually went up. From a clinical perspective as well, the anxiety hormones went down in those that were able to power pose, and their confidence levels went up to the point where they were even willing to, as she said, roll the dice and gamble more than they would have before. So there's certain techniques that you can employ as a presenter that don't have to be super grandiose, but they can be very meaningful and specific to you, so that you can, again, become your authentic self. So, Corey, if we kind of take it one step further, I want to address the messaging as well. So we've touched on our awareness, what our biases can be, and then it comes down to, what is our message? And I realized in this presentation too, as I was crafting it, I left the audience to last. So there is a reason for that. So don't worry, it wasn't an error in this one whatsoever. But in regards to the message, imagine an onion, okay? And at the very center of that onion is you. It's your awareness. The next layer is going to be what your intention is, your authentic why behind the words, why you're trying to convey this. The next layer is going to be the words that you're using, the actual message. And on top of that, stay with me, on top of that is going to be your communication style. There's a lot of room to be able to play with those factors. But again, it always comes down to your authentic self. And I get asked the question a lot, Chloe, when you're working on messaging or you're doing content creation, to script or not to script, what's the best way to go about it? And there's been, many studies, there's quite a few programs out there that say never memorize your lines. Unless you're on stage or unless you're, on camera, just don't memorize your lines. And the reason why I find that people often say that is because when we're memorizing something, we tend to deliver it as if we're reading a book and it becomes monotone. That's not helpful, because a lot of us are doing so much time just trying to make sure we can get the right words out that we've conditioned ourselves to believe that that is the only way that we can present that content. So we kind of locked ourselves in to this very rigid way. Now, I myself have done speeches and presentations that have been extremely scripted, and there's absolutely a time and a place for that. And if that is how you're able to present your most authentic self, then by all means, if it's working for you, keep doing it. That's fantastic that you found a method and a technique that lets you present in your best way. Other types of individuals tend to prefer more of a free-flowing atmosphere. And it always comes down to, what is your outline? And the best framework that I've ever heard, and I'm sure many of you have heard as well, when it comes to presenting, is tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. And if you can kind of follow that very kind of 30,000 foot view of what your message can be, then it starts to become a little bit easier, I find, when we're actually trying to find what our points are. And I highly recommend to everyone to have an outline, have your points. If you are the type of writer that just likes to write all of your words down without editing it first and then go back and try to piece them together, that is a fantastic way to make sure that you're hearing your own voice on the page. But then we need to synthesize that and take out some of those major points. And again, this isn't something that you haven't already heard, but I'll share with you actually, because it was funny when we were joining the call today. I was going to use this as a case study. I had to rejig a few things because technology, as we all know, can be a challenge at times. And I had my little studio set up here. We ended up going between 3 laptops and a couple cell phones. And again, thank you to Corey for being such a fantastic participant in our technology almost debacle this morning. But one of the things that I always like to keep around is some sort of table of content, okay? It doesn't have to be something very, I would say it has to be something very specific, but it doesn't have to be very long. Again, when it comes down to messaging, it's just very important that you have something that's going to trigger what it is you're going to say next, okay? So when you're setting up for your presentation, it is absolutely okay for you to have notes. I have heard, I'm sure we all have, that people say, oh, the best presenters don't have notes. I go, well, although that can be true, absolutely. I would say the best presenters are the ones that are using their whole self and whatever tools and techniques that they use to communicate the most effective way for the audience. So if you were at a symposium on nobody likes notes, then probably don't bring a page of notes with you. But the likelihood of that happening is not very likely. So feel free to use the tools, whether it's cue cards, and you just have a few of those triggering points, or if you do prefer to have your script in front of you, multiple laptops, whatever the case may be, just know that you're allowed to use those, okay? So if anybody tells you that you can't memorize something, I think what they're really trying to say is make sure that you're not setting yourself up for failure, so that if you deviate a little bit away from, your message, that you can always get yourself back on track, okay? And there was actually, what article was I reading? There was one on brain freezes. It was from, oh my goodness, yeah, the brain freeze, right? It's perfect. Just talking about the brain freeze one, National Social Anxiety Center in San Francisco. And they were talking about the reason why brain freezes can happen. And one of their sources they were citing was that it comes down to that, issue about memorization and locking us in on something like that. So from their experience, and again, I've had an experience before where I completely forgot my lines on stage. It can be a very horrifying experience. But please take heart, and this is one of the best pieces of advice anybody has ever given me. Ready? Your audience does not necessarily know that you messed up. Okay? Take heart in that. And it's true. When we forget our lines, or we pause, or a fear monster comes back, that pause that we are doing as the presenter can feel like an eternity. It just goes on, and then there's silence. And the audience is going, oh, wow, that's a dramatic pause. I'm digging in. I'm leaning into this presentation. For the audience, that pause is not nearly as long as what we experience. So just know that the audience hasn't been sitting beside you while you've been content creating or script writing. The audience is there to join you, not judge you in this experience. They want you to succeed. So if you do find yourself in a group presentation and your colleague happened to lose their lines, feel free to prompt them, okay? And that's why it's so important that everybody's aware of the content of the presentation. When we find ourselves alone on stage, that's a great time that you can bring your notes up to the podium. And if you're in a facilitation, which is more of the question and answer, you know, the facilitator leading the audience to the answers rather than just telling them like we're having that relationship today, you're actually, if you're comfortable with it, you can rely on your audience for support. You're all in the same journey. You're created this atmosphere of this collective kind of happy place, essentially, where you can actually ask them questions depending on the format, of course, and they're probably going to be able to help you out. So a technique is, if you are in a facilitation and you do forget your place, it's okay to jokingly say, add some humor. Oh, where was I? Help me remember where I was. And you'd be surprised that the audience is very much likely to want to save you, which means that they jump in to be able to make sure that you know what's going on. So in a nutshell, that's about your messaging. And I wanted to keep this pretty high level because, you know, making sure that we're maintaining our time today so we don't run over, because I can definitely be a talker, as we've all seen here. So what I'd like to do now is jump a little bit into the audience factor. And I'm just going to refer here to, because I have our Slido open. So thank you everybody for some very, very good questions that are actually leading into our audience section. So you guys are right there with me. Thank you so much. Why don't I take one of these questions right now, because it's very apropos to what we're doing. So one of the questions here, it says, do you have any suggestions on how to handle the audience or customers, etc., who are deadpan and give you no response, positive or negative? Excellent question. I was actually just working with my team on this week. And you will become an expert. I assure you, you will become an expert on handling deadpan audiences when you are presenting to 45 muted mics on a WebEx or a Zoom call. It's almost like sometimes we have to have an audience laugh track in our head in the best case scenario. And when the audience, so I think for this one too, you might mean that the audience is in front of you and they're not giving you anything back, which is very different than the technological adaptations that we've had to do. So I'll address that side of the question. If you have been your authentic self, you've presented your clear intentions, you have good intentions, you feel like the audience has come to the meeting, your clients have come to the meeting, or you know, the audience has joined you today and some comment falls flat, just keep going. If you were expecting a big laugh, maybe rethink your career in comedy. But even the best comedians, even the best presenters have had a disconnect with the audience. So if for some reason the audience reacts like overly positively and you do get this like warm round of applause and you weren't expecting it, then you want to make sure that you're pausing to let that experience for the audience happen, and then jump in at the very end and continue on what you're saying, okay? But again, it's an excellent question. If the audience is not giving you anything, then you want to make sure that you just keep going, okay? That's a really good one. This is what my piano teacher used to say. If you screw up, Don't worry, the audience probably doesn't know, your teacher and the adjudicators might, but just keep going. So excellent, excellent question. And Corey, why don't we flip to the next slide, because this is perfect. We're getting a lot of great questions around kind of the audience and things like that. Let's see here. Let's answer one more question, and because we're doing good on time, and then we'll jump into the audience, our third section for our course today. So let's see here. From the top of the list, it says, I don't have fear of presenting, but when I speak, then I start to have the dry mouth, the nerves. How do I tackle my physical response? It's fantastic. I love that, because it happens to everybody to some degree. Okay, whether they start to get the jitters, the dry mouth could be terrible. You know, I've had it too. We've probably heard it in presentations where it becomes almost challenging to listen to the individual because you're just like, man, get this person a glass of water. So it happens to everybody. And this is an absolutely excellent question. How can we somehow change our physical response to what we're doing? And honestly, the answer is practice. Unfortunately, there's not really a better answer that I've ever been able to come up with. But what we mean by practice are some of the techniques that you can do to understand why it is that you're getting that dry mouth. So for example, it could be literally what you did right before. So did you exert yourself, physical activity? Did you go out for lunch before? Have you not hydrated well or eaten anything well? How do we kind of control those physiological responses? The breathlessness, I would absolutely take you back to the first technique that we did here today. And if it's happening to you as soon as you're speaking, take a big breath and let it out. The audience is going to wait for you. Again, they're not here to judge. They're here to join you on your journey. So as the presenter, you have the most amazing opportunity to create an atmosphere and space for everyone to suspend their disbelief and be in that moment with you. So if you need to take that extra moment and just kind of, you know, moisten your palate, make sure that, especially if you're at a podium or wherever you're presenting, that you have items around you that are going to make you more comfortable. So for example, I have a little fan that I have right here because I don't get the Beyonce look, but it definitely helps with airflow so I don't get overheated. I have a glass of water that's within arm's reach. I actually have, that was one of the tips and techniques I was going to share at the end, but I think it's a good one too, that if you're, you know, over technology and you have children or pets around, and maybe you want to have a little cat toy or something nearby that you can throw and dissuade your cat from joining the presentation with you. So the last piece that I'll say to this question, I don't want to be belligerent, is to say, when you are practicing in front of a large group of people, that can seem really daunting. Right? That's maybe a lot of the times where dry mouth happens. Again, you can start small. When you're doing presentations, start doing it in front of your family members. I mean, of course, if it's client confidentiality and privacy, don't do that. You can do it in front of your colleagues and start with smaller groups until you're comfortable being able to reach for certain items like a glass of water and know that you're in control of that space. So excellent question. We do have some techniques at the end that I will be sharing with you that will definitely help to address this a little bit more. And power posing, definitely do some power posing. Okay, so our audience, it's been changed over the last, I would say, 3-4 months. We're often presenting to a screen, or not necessarily, but one of the most important things is that we are presenting to people. We are all human beings. And as an audience, as I've mentioned, we want everyone to succeed. That is the goal. The audience is not there to be malicious and boo you and heckle you. I mean, depending on the presentation that you're in, but typically your audience is not there to drag you down and tear you down. They are there to help build you up. So it's super important to understand why your audience has taken time out of their day, their very busy days, time away from their family, away from their work, away from themselves, to be here with you today. Like, what is that motivation about? And when you can figure that out, then you start to have that connection with the audience. They clearly want something from you and you have something to give. Hopefully that matches up. That's always a bonus when it does. So knowing, like in an environment like this, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting all of you. And again, it's so nice to spend some time with each one of you. So having not been able to shake your hand before the call today, not being able to say, hey, what is it that you're really looking to get out of this? I have to make certain assumptions that are why you came here today. So you are interested in public speaking, you wanted to have a refresher, you wanted to, make sure that what you're doing is right up there, top notch. Absolutely. So again, if you are authentically and honestly trying to communicate with your audience and understand them, they're going to feel that. And they're also going to give you that honesty and integrity back, so that when you're looking out to them, you'll be able to see that they're nodding along. You'll be able to see that there's eye contact. That's a huge one. Now, man, we've all been the presenter where the audience, you'd mentioned before, it was a great question that they deadpan, or we lose them, or they're stealing focus. And that's a really big one when it comes to meetings, board meetings, anything like that. Let's say you're standing up there and you're presenting quarterly sales results, and all of a sudden VP of marketing just goes off on a tangent and steals the focus away from your presentation. And I get asked that question a lot. What do you do if someone is stealing your thunder? And it really depends on how comfortable you are handling the audience. Please know that as the presenter, you do have control, a certain level of control over the situation. And just knowing that you have the opportunity to invite someone to leave if they're not enjoying the presentation or they're being belligerent, just know that you have that resource, that tool in your toolbox if you needed to use it. Sometimes just knowing that we have that makes us feel a little bit like, okay, I can handle the situation. I was in a presentation once, and an audience member got right up in front of the microphone and started losing it. They didn't like the content. They just felt it wasn't appropriate for them. They didn't know why they were there. It was very aggressive towards the entire group. It was more in an intimate setting. And, as a presenter, we're humans, right? We don't want to offend anybody. We don't want to make it seem like it's not a, fair place for everybody to play. And I just literally looked at them and I said, I'm sorry you feel that way. I invite you to leave the presentation now. And if you'd like to hang around, we can discuss this with the organizers. That is a very extreme situation that I hope never happens to anybody. But if it does, again, you have that resource available to you. Another one that has come up is what if there's an audience member that is asking questions that's deferring you away from what your main topic is. We've seen this in team meetings where that same person keeps raising their hand and they keep asking all these questions. Everybody just wants to go because it's 5:45, whatever the case may be. There's a polite way of doing it that has worked with in my career. It's called the parking lot. Whoever's using the parking lot, way to go. For those of you that haven't used the parking lot yet, again, tool in your toolbox. The parking lot is a polite way to tell the individual that you've understood what they're saying, you acknowledge what they're saying, but you're going to park it over here for a different discussion. And usually individuals, the reason why they're piping up is because they want to be heard, they want to be understood, they want to be acknowledged. Typically, their intention is not to throw you off balance. Okay, honestly, you got to assume and expect that everybody in the audience is there to support you. So with knowing that assumption, if that does happen, acknowledge the person and then just say you're going to address it later and move on. And I highly recommend that you do address it later and move on. That's a great way to do it. One of the best ways to make sure that your audience is going to be there with you the whole time is understanding your spatial awareness. This is huge. And, we've all been able to present in areas where it's been an auditorium setting, or it's been rounds of 6 or 8 in a more kind of banquet dinette style, or you're in a client meeting, like one-on-one with your clients. When we control the space around us, it makes us so much more comfortable to potentially interact with our audience. Now, in the acting world, there's something called the fourth wall, which is what I'm breaking right now by talking directly to you. It's how newscasters present. It's how the majority of people present. And we're directing it right to the audience. I challenge you to be able to walk into the audience in one of your presentations. Now, I would recommend it if it's, you know, not walking off the stage podium style, but I don't know, it might be an interesting way to you know, keep your audience on their toes. But it works very well if you're in an office setting, you're in a boardroom. So imagine yourself, you're in a boardroom, let's say it's like 20-person boardroom. You have your PowerPoint slide up at the front, you're clicking through, you're going, okay, my presentation's going pretty good, going pretty well rather. And people are just starting to check their phones, lose a little focus. Maybe there's two people talking at the back of the room. That's always my favorite. Rather than directly call out these people, a great way to do it is go stand right behind them. As a facilitator, that was one of the best, you know, nuggets of knowledge that somebody gave me to, especially when you're facilitating to, I would say, adolescents and, you know, kind of the youth demographic, because you don't want to put them on the spot and make them feel unworthy or like they've done anything really wrong. You just want them to get back on track. So great tip, go stand right behind them, because what that does is it shifts all of the audience attention onto this person. And this person didn't sign up to be the presenter today. So now they're going, oops, okay, I'm gonna hopefully change my behavior. So that's a really good one that you can definitely employ. And speaking of who would be in the audience is another thing too. You know, sometimes we're able to understand the demographic, the makeup of who's in our audience. Sometimes we're able to do some research ahead of time if we have our fantastic sponsors like Pacific Blue Cross, who's on the call joining us today, as well as our fantastic Board of Trade. But we often encounter a situation, especially on, let's say, Zoom or different technological platforms, where all of a sudden your boss joins and you're presenting. And I get that question a lot. They're like, what do I have to do differently if my executive vice president or my regional president or the CEO is now on the call with me? People start to go, eek! I got to do something different. I'm more anxious than before. Well, just know that typically leaders want you to succeed. So they're actually there more as a cheerleader than they are to be their judgmental factor. Okay, so just continue to be your authentic self and surprise them and surprise yourself with your consistency in delivery. Okay, and you should also feel pretty good that a leader has taken an interest in what your content is and how you're going to present it. That can be a really cool feeling. So just know that who's ever in the audience, whatever items you have around you, feel free to move those items into kind of an area that's going to give you enough space to work. Okay, because again, you're the one that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. The audience is also doing some of the heavy lifting, but pretty much it's going to be you as the presenter. So next slide, Corey, if you don't mind. So after we finish the presentation, everybody's, you know, you're kind of feeling the jitters. Well, what if it didn't go well? Oh, we've been there, haven't we? Mm-hmm. Where, man, maybe the audience just was not there with you. Maybe you honestly did your best and you left everything out on the field, but it just did not go well. I'll give you this tip. Acknowledge it. Identify if there's anything that you can adjust so that you can be better next time, and then forget about it. Okay, that's also a sales technique rather. Identify and adjust, and then like for cold calling, if someone hangs up on you, don't dwell on that one. Just move on to the next one. See if there is a takeaway that you can have, but there's going to be so many good presentations that you're going to be doing. We've all had a bad one. We've all had one go sideways. Please don't dwell on it, okay? Please don't dwell on it. You got a lot more important things to do than worry about one necessarily bad presentation, okay? So if we skip to the next slide, Corey, because I'll be mindful of time, so I want to make sure that we get to some of these fantastic questions that are rolling in. This quote is from Maya Angelou, is a predominant figure, obviously, and this really resonated with me as a presenter as well. So I've learned that people will forget what you've said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And as a presenter, you are sharing your story, whatever that may be. Maybe it's a sales pitch, maybe you're giving a speech at a wedding, maybe it's a formal presentation. You are putting yourself out there. So you owe it to yourself to let fear aside and do the best that you can, because your story is worth sharing. You're worth it to be able to share that. Okay, no matter what anybody else says, you have a voice. That is your instrument. And you're allowed to share that in a respectful, meaningful way with your audience. And hopefully you're able to leave them feeling inspired. That's one of the intentions that I have when I go into different types of presentations like this. That's one of the hopeful outcomes, I would say, is that people feel a little bit more willing to stretch their skills as a presenter and try different things. So what I'd like to share with you now are a few techniques, I should say, that not only are physical to get you active and ready to be a presenter, but also that are able to mentally prep you as well. So from the physical perspective, you want to make sure, just like your voice is an engine, you want to warm up that engine. Okay, and a lot of people, just bear with me, suspend your disbelief if you don't think that these voice exercises work. But I assure you that these are ones that I use that help me get through my presentation in a much easier way from my perspective, and the audience seems to think that I've been able to articulate it well. So one of my favorite ones from a physical perspective is an articulation exercise. And there's quite a few, but my absolute favorite, you say the words repeatedly over and over again, and you start slow, and then you're going to speed it up, okay? And you can do this until you kind of get tongue-tied, but if you do this for like 15 to 30 seconds before your presentation, it's really going to help you out. So the words are red leather, yellow leather. Red leather, yellow leather. And you're all muted, so you can try it at home. And what you want to do again is start slow, red leather, yellow leather. And then you want to slowly speed that up. Okay, I can mentally hear people trying it on the call. So red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather, and do it as fast as you possibly can. And what that does is it works the back of your tongue and the front of your tongue so that we don't get tongue-tied when we're actually speaking. So I highly employ you to actually try that one for sure. Another fan favorite of voice coaches is the Siren. I'm sure hopefully your kids aren't going to pick up on this if they're around, because it can be really annoying. But I do this in my car on the way to presentation. So yeah, it definitely works. So what you want to do is it's going to warm up your actual voice, your vocal cords themselves. So you want to start low, so ooh, go really high. So I'm not going to do it repeatedly because again, I don't want to annoy too many people. But what that does is it expands your register so that when you're communicating with your audience, you're able to use tone and intonation and pitch to be able to get your point across. So if you haven't warmed that up beforehand, it can seem pitchy, or there can be some issues when you're actually presenting. So we have the Siren and we have red leather, yellow leather. A physical one is just getting limber, doing some stretching, getting your body moving before a presentation, trying the power poses. Honestly, I'm a pretty confident presenter at times. I mean, we all have presentations where we're not feeling super good, but power posing is actually a really fun way to put a smile on your face. So I highly encourage you to do that one. And also knowing what your routine is before your presentation. So allowing yourself to acknowledge how you're feeling. Understanding, and again, this goes back to some of that baggage conversation that we had, understanding how you woke up. What is going on that's inside or out of your control? Am I going to eat before my presentation? Am I going to drink water before my presentation? What is it that I need to be successful? And I can give you a plethora of items to say, this is stuff that works for me. But the only way that you can develop your own tried and true routine is to actually test it for yourself, okay? And again, be kind to yourself acknowledge when something isn't working, acknowledge when you want to do something better, have a meeting recorded and then review it with your trusted advisor or your like really close family. Just remember, your family's probably going to pick on you a little bit more than maybe a colleague would, but sometimes that can be, if it's constructive criticism and feedback, that can be a tool to help you develop in your career. So with that, because we're doing pretty good on time, I want to just get to some more of these questions, if you don't mind, because there are some good ones. And I think I'm not going to say who, I think I know who one of these is from, but this is a fantastic one. So bear with me on these questions, okay? This is going to be actually quite helpful to supplement what we've learned today. So the question is, as a woman, sometimes we downplay our expertise or our ability, and we defer that to others to make the speech or presentation. So what I'm understanding from this question is that oftentimes women have a tendency to speak in a self-deprecating tone, or we give someone our thunder. We're like, okay, you can do it, okay? And I don't want to go too deep in the gender biases that can happen when it comes into the kind of sociology of presentations. But typically that's just a bias, unfortunately, that person is bringing to the table. So regardless of gender, it really comes down to, why does that person feel that they are not worthy or not valuable enough to make that presentation? And that could be something that is a way bigger conversation outside of just, oh, I'm anecdotally saying, you know, something self-deprecating. It could really be a conditioning effect from their whole life. It could be feedback that they received from their industry, or gosh forbid, their leaders or their company, around making sure that you're kind of just that round peg in the round hole kind of situation. So what I would recommend to help overcome some of those biases would be practicing on camera and watching yourself, and then getting your trusted advisor to sit with you. And that's someone that is going to be your cheerleader. They're going to pump you up. Another aspect I would say that would be taking a step back from presenting would be, look at your kind of your social circle in regards to who are your go-to energy motivators, who's around you to say, yes, you got this. And what is your self-speak as well? There's been many great TED Talks on this as well. Is my self-speak, so is the narrative that's happening in my head positive or negative? We all have positive and negative emotions, don't get me wrong, and that's completely valid. But are the negative ones taking over? And are they taking over right before I'm about to speak? So shifting that narrative internally can be very challenging, absolutely challenging. So ways to overcome that is to have items around you that are going to put you in your happy place, make you feel confident. Taking a mindfulness moment for yourself. That's another technique that we have a few moments to share. So I'll share this one with you. I learned it from my yoga instructor, but you can use it in presentation skills. Honestly, trust me. All you have to do is close your eyes. You can humor me, close your eyes. And what you're going to do is any thought that comes into your mind, you're just going to acknowledge it and let it float on by. And hopefully the end state is to be somewhat zen and really not have any one specific idea in your head. So you just take a moment. And I'm thinking, okay, I got work to do after this. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to acknowledge it and let it float on by. And try to reach that Zen space where there's no negativity that's going to be in there. And sometimes you'll find that can actually change how you view yourself, how the audience views you, and how you're able to communicate that. So it's a very, very good question. Okay, here's another question. So I hope I answered that well. If you have any more comments on this, I mean, my email's up there too, so please feel free to keep the comments coming. Oh, this is such a good one. What are your views? So Raj, thank you for the question. What are your views on PowerPoint and using it to present or guide your speakers and content? Yes, it's a very, very good one. PowerPoint has a place. And what I mean by PowerPoint would be any visual that you put up on the screen. If you have banners, if you have whatever, they have a time and a place, absolutely. If you're presenting quarterly sales numbers, just an example I keep going back to, might be helpful to have the quarterly sales numbers, listed up there, right? One thing you just want to make sure of is that your visual representations do not distract the audience from what it is you're actually telling them. They're not there to watch a video with you necessarily. They are there to be able to kind of have some kind of song and a dance between you and the audience. So make sure there's not too many words on your PowerPoint slide. There's a lot of people that say, okay, 7 words on a PowerPoint slide. What I think they're trying to say is make sure, again, that what's up there is just supporting you. So here's an example. Let's say you wanted to talk about, okay, let's use the techniques example that we were just speaking about. On a PowerPoint slide, if I wanted to do a visual for that, I probably just would have had a picture of an individual practicing something, and then I would tell you about the techniques. Or I could have done bullet points that just highlight the name of each technique, and then I could provide you that information. So again, Raj, great question. For people that love PowerPoint, be careful of all the animations and things like that, because again, if someone else has to run your PowerPoint, you want to make sure, and again, Corey, props to Corey, it's just Starbucks card or something. You want to make sure that it's going to be someone else could actually lead your presentation too. God forbid you can't. So Raj, great question. And we have, yeah.
Just to jump in there, sorry, and for those of you, I didn't introduce myself at the beginning, so this is Corey at the Board of Trade here. We did have one question that was typed into the chat box here on Zoom, so I don't know if you saw that. But someone asked about, they want to get their message out to people, but they're not sure where to start and how to get started crafting that message. That kind of goes back to your scripting comments and kind of mapping out what it is that your intention is, I guess, at the beginning. But do you want to have any comment on how to start putting your thoughts together around getting your message out to people?
Excellent question, Corey. Thank you so much, and thank you to whomever wrote that question. So around content creation and getting started, honestly, when I'm having a challenge understanding where it is I'm trying to go with the presentation, I utilize a technique which is just putting pen to paper and just start writing. Okay, you can do what's similar to a mind map. Okay, where you just have, let's say your boss tells you that they want you to present on, I don't know, independent marketing strategies from the competitor, and you're like, oh, this is going to be exciting. It comes down to A, are you passionate about the subject? And 2, sometimes we have to do it for work. So what you can do is just put literally, not a title, but just the bullet point of what it is you're trying to explain. And you can just start writing. And then from that, after you review it, you're likely going to be able to pull out some themes and hopefully structure it in a way where it would be 3 main themes followed by a few bullet points on each one. Honestly, the hardest part about content creation is just getting started. So be kind to yourself if you do have writer's block. There's also some, physicalities that you can do. If you just really don't want to write it down, you can actually just record yourself in like a voice memo just to get some stuff started. Another thing too is get some of those trusted advisors together with you and ask them, be like, I have this topic that I'm having a challenge with. It's a struggle for me to get started. What are your opinions on it? And the last piece of this question that is really crucial is research. Any type of research that you can do to support your point or understand where previous presenters or authors have actually gone with this topic can sometimes spark an idea in you that says, okay, I completely understand where they were going with this train of thought, but what if? And then your idea. Okay, and sometimes we're not trying to reinvent the wheel whatsoever, right? Sometimes we're just amalgamating other pieces of information into a cohesive message. So be kind to yourself, do some research, and then try to just start writing or recording yourself and then see what comes out. So that's a really, really good question. Thank you for bringing that one forward. Okay, so this one, it's a great one. I think we've kind of handled it. Oh, actually, no, this one's a good one from Natalie. Thank you, Natalie. I'm so glad you brought this one up because timing is everything. So Natalie's question is, how do you handle a presentation where you feel rushed due to a set time limit? Oh yes, this one is one of my favorites. Sometimes I have the anxiety of the opposite, that I've been given too much time and I'm anxious that I won't be able to fill it, and somehow we're always able to get that content. So I would say if you're feeling rushed, it could be a few things. It could be one, let's say you have a lot of information to provide and they've only given you that short amount of time. If that's the case, you're going to become an expert in synthesizing your content. What I mean by that is literally if you had a 10-second window to share your idea, you need to be able to synthesize your argument into something that specific, and then start to layer on the other points that are in kind of ranked importance. If you're currently in a presentation and the time is counting down, just know that, you know, it's very important to be mindful of everybody's time, but also make sure that, you know, if you need to take an extra 2 or 3 minutes to explain your point, you're allowed to ask the audience or ask the organizer, say, hey, we're really on a, you know, a really good train of thought here. Would you mind if we ran over 2 to 3 minutes to, you know, continue this conversation? Most times people are going to say yes. There may be a few people that have a meeting that is right afterwards and they might have to excuse themselves, but just know that you're in control of the timing as well. So what I like to do is I'll have different monitors around to be able to check the time. The organizers are always wonderful enough to usually keep you on time, which is good. So feel free to have, some people like to use a timer if they kind of know that they only have 5 minutes, but yeah, feel free to check the time as you go. And if you do feel rushed, honestly, you can say, you know what, we only have 5 minutes today. I'm going to cover what I can. And if you're interested, next time we can follow up on that. So just remember that you're in control on that one. And it can be a challenge if time feels like it's getting away from you. So Natalie, excellent question. Ooh, Rick, excellent question. Man, these questions are so fantastic. I'm glad you're such an engaged audience today. Thank you so much for coming on this journey. Okay, Rick asks, should one ask the audience for formal evaluations? So I'm assuming that means a survey of how the presenter did or what the content was. I usually say yes, because for me, I like the feedback. I want to know if the audience was like, man, that content really wasn't that great. Or if there's an opportunity for, you know, us to pick up on a module and expand it somewhere else. It's really up to you. And also, what are you going to do with that information if you receive it? Right? If you honestly don't care what the audience thought, which I hope nobody feels that way, but sometimes you can get burnt out. You know, again, what are you going to do with the information? So if you're going to like review it and potentially adapt or adjust or evolve some of your content or the way that you're saying it, then yeah, by all means, feedback. I highly encourage you to submit feedback for this presentation. Rick will probably be maybe the #1 person submitting feedback. But also remember this, feedback is very good, but feedback isn't the end all be all. And what I mean by that is sometimes you can have an outlier in the audience that is just like, not digging what you're putting down. So if that's the case, then just make sure that you're evaluating all of the surveys that are coming in. And there's always like, we had one that we did, it was for like the CPA, a whole bunch of CPAs. And there was one gentleman who thought that ranking everybody ones was like, yay, #1. No, #1 was like the worst on our survey and #5 was the best. So we were able to assume that based on the amount of surveys that we received, that this person maybe just misunderstood what, you know, the ranking system. And also, Rick, just for the last point on this, is what is going to be the content of the survey, right? So understanding what it is you're trying to get out of it is crucial. And also making the survey short, accessible, and easy for the individual who's reading it to be able to understand it, because people usually don't want to take more than 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, which would be quite long on one of those surveys. So good stuff. I know we're and you know, this was to I think Natalie's earlier point, timing. So maybe we have time for one more question, or Corey, is there another one in the message board?
There's one more that got typed in here. It kind of goes, I think people touched on this around the idea of the deadpan audience or not getting any feedback. So another person has typed in, what do you do if you get the sense that you're kind of losing audience? I mean, I've been in meetings where people start checking their phones, or some of them just get up and leave and don't come back. What how do you get the, what do you do if you feel that that's happening? How do you reel them back in, bring them back in?
Excellent. I love that question. There's a few techniques. The first piece of that, when that happens, is the self-awareness that you're no longer the focus of attention. And our initial reaction to that can be panic. We're like, oh no, my intentions are not being received. Something's happening. There's a disconnect. Try not to panic. And you can do maybe I'll give you one of 2 or 3 options. The first one, go silent. The audience immediately looks up going, what's wrong? First of all, is it over? 2, why is it so quiet all of a sudden? And you're allowed to have an honest moment with the audience where you're like, look, I can tell this content's not really resonating with you, but so let me tell you a story instead. And I always like to have examples and stories as well, because we can obviously communicate through stories we have for thousands of years. So yeah, use silence, shift to storytelling. You can let the audience, depending on your format, you can give them a break. You can say, okay, you know what? I can see everybody, we're kind of losing people. We're going to take a 2 to 5 minute bio break. Everybody come back, and give them a very specific time of when they have to come back. And if some don't, just let it be. Honestly, just move on from that. So I would definitely try the silence technique. You'd be surprised at how quickly people start to look up from what they're doing and go, oh my goodness. So that's an excellent question. Thank you for bringing that one up.
Perfect. I think we probably have time for the last one. I think that we haven't tackled, and I think you maybe have teased this a little bit on some other topics. Sure. But the idea of, if you want to be a confident speaker, and I think you talked about having a passion or knowledge about what you're speaking about, but what if you don't feel confident in your knowledge or your passion on that topic, yet you have to, as part of your work, I think you talked about, marketing strategies for other companies. If you're stuck doing that and you've got something coming up next week where you've got to present on something you don't know all that much about, you don't care all that much about, how do you as a professional still put your best foot forward?
I love this question. So there was a few ways that I was taught. And the first way was with an acting coach, a director that would literally just give you whatever lines, like script to read, and then you would just have to present it, and they would shout at you in a respectful but shouty way for you to change how you're delivering it. So now you're happy, now you're sad, now you're confident, now you're doing it dancing, now you're on Broadway, whatever. And what that allows us to do is pivot and shift on our presentation to be able for us to develop a little bit more confidence in our ability to shift, okay? The second factor of that one is being able to do impromptu speeches. And one of the, when I was in a presentation skills class, the instructor would say, okay, at the beginning of every single class, I'm gonna randomly select somebody. They have to wait outside, and the class is going to pick a random topic for you to present on for either 30 seconds, 2 minutes, or 5 minutes. And when you suspend your anxiety and you say, I'm just going to come up with whatever I can possibly do, following those techniques that we said around controlling your breath, making sure that you're practicing your articulation, following the very simple model of tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. You, as humans, we're actually quite creative and inventive when we can come up with stuff. So if it is new content, synthesize it into those very specific bullet points. You can use a team with you. If you have the opportunity to bring in an expert, I mean, by all means, do that. And do some research, and just probably know that the topic you're presenting on has been presented on before, and other people might have some really good comments and tidbits, and then source them. And, like we did with our TED Talks today, or whatever the case may be, that actually lends credibility to your presentation. So the last piece I'll leave you with is confidence, okay? You are worth telling your story, okay? You are worth the breath that it takes, the energy, the preparation. So just know that you're worth it, and your story is worth telling. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Chloe. A few things I want to pick up there. I think a few people typed into the chat box there, but the red leather, yellow leather thing, I'm going to be working on a lot, because that's my problem.
Yes, I will practice that with you.
It all just rolls together here. So no, that's a good one here. And I think your idea of trusted advisor. You mentioned that a few times, and I know a few companies that yeah, when someone is presenting or speaking and they're trying to do professional development, they actually film them and then they sit down and go over it, and it might be the most terrifying, challenging thing to do. See yourself looked at that way, but I think we've mentioned a few times having a third party be able to give you some advice or tips is important. And as part of our women's network, we know how important relationships and mentorship and that kind of support is. So it's interesting that you touched on it as part of this as well. So on behalf of our Women's Business Success Network on the Board of Trade, thanks so much for taking the time out of your schedule to chat with us today. And I think you mentioned it's hard when you're facing 50 muted mics, but yeah, exactly. So I appreciate you just kind of going with it. I know we didn't have, you don't have the live audience, and we're not going to have live audiences for a while, unfortunately, but really appreciate you taking the time to be here today and to share your thoughts. We've known each other for many years, and it's a thrill to have you be able to be a part of it today. Pardon me. And then just a very big thank you to our sponsors, our platinum sponsor, Pacific Blue Cross. And thank you to Lisa for opening up our session today, and Electronic Arts Canada, two amazing partners of the Board of Trade and lots that we do for the city here. So a big thanks to them and to all of you for being here today. I hope you enjoyed the session, and hopefully we'll see you at the part 2 and 3 of our 3-part series here that we're doing with our Women's Network. So any final words, Chloe, before I log us off here?
Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing everybody at the next seminar.
Perfect. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.